August 12, 1942, Bernard Montgomery stepped off the aircraft at Cairo in the middle of a disaster. For 16 months, Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps had been mauling British forces across the western desert, and just 6 weeks earlier, Tobruk had fallen in a single day. 33,000 men surrendered, a humiliation that shook Churchill's government to its core. Now Rommel sat barely 60 miles from Alexandria, and the Eighth Army, bloodied and demoralized, had its back against the final defensive line at El Alamein. Montgomery, 54 years old, compact and precise, had been sent to take command of an army that had forgotten how to win. He spent his first day visiting headquarters, reading situation reports, studying maps. The picture was grim. Rommel commanded roughly 90,000 men, 50,000 Germans, and 40,000 Italians, supported by around 500 tanks, though many were obsolete Italian models. The Afrika Korps itself, the German component, numbered perhaps 30,000 combat troops organized into 2 panzer divisions and 1 light division. They were outnumbered. British and Commonwealth forces at Alamein totaled around 150,000 men with over 700 tanks. On paper, the advantage was clear, but numbers meant nothing if you didn't know how to use them, and for 16 months, Rommel had been teaching the British that lesson with brutal efficiency. Montgomery knew the statistics of defeat. Gazala in June, where Rommel had destroyed over 230 British tanks and captured Tobruk with its massive supply dumps. Crusader the previous November, where initial British success had dissolved into confused fighting and ultimate withdrawal. Every encounter seemed to follow the same pattern: British numerical superiority, initial confidence, then sudden German counterattack that shattered formations and sent units reeling backward. Montgomery sat in his new headquarters that first evening and wrote in his diary. He was methodical about such things, recording his observations with the precision of a man who believed war was a problem to be solved through analysis. The Afrika Korps, he noted, was not invincible. They were skilled, certainly. Their tactical coordination was superior. Their use of 88mm anti-aircraft guns in an anti-tank role had revolutionized desert warfare. Those guns could destroy any British tank at ranges where British weapons were useless. Their panzer divisions moved with a fluidity that British armor couldn't match, concentrating force at decisive points, while British tanks scattered across the battlefield in penny packets. But Montgomery saw weaknesses. The Afrika Korps was at the end of a supply line stretching back through Libya to Tripoli, then across the Mediterranean from Italy. Every gallon of fuel, every shell, every replacement part had to survive the gauntlet of British submarines and aircraft. Rommel's logistics were fragile, his army was tired, and crucially, he was outnumbered in men, tanks, artillery, and aircraft. The material balance favored Britain, if only someone could figure out how to leverage it. On August 13th, Montgomery formally took command. He called a meeting of his senior officers at 8th Army headquarters. The men who filed in were veterans of defeat, cautious, defensive-minded, already thinking about the next retreat if Rommel attacked. Montgomery stood before them, small and sharp-featured, and his first words were simple. Quote, 0. The officers stirred. This was different. Montgomery continued, laying out his assessment. The Afrika Korps, he told them, fought according to a pattern. Rommel used his panzers aggressively, seeking to penetrate British positions, then exploiting gaps with rapid movement. He relied on superior tactical skill to offset numerical disadvantage. He expected British commanders to react defensively, to worry about their flanks, to pull back when threatened. That pattern, Montgomery said, would now be broken. He had studied Rommel's methods in detail. The German commander was bold, opportunistic, willing to take risks. He had a genius for reading a battle and striking at the critical moment. But boldness required fuel and ammunition, and Rommel was short of both. Intelligence reports. Montgomery had access to ultra-decrypts. though he couldn't mention this to his officers, showed the Afrika Korps was struggling. Fuel stocks were critically low. Tank strength was down. The Italian divisions were poorly equipped and increasingly unreliable. Montgomery's plan was simple: refuse to play Rommel's game. No more scattered tank charges, no more reactive scrambling to counter German moves. Instead, the Eighth Army would fight from prepared positions, using its artillery and anti-tank guns to break up German attacks. British tanks would be held in reserve, used only when the enemy was weakened and disorganized. Air power would interdict supply lines and hammer Axis positions. And most importantly, there would be no retreat. The army would stand at El Alamein, and Rommel would break himself against it. He knew Rommel would attack soon. Intelligence suggested the Afrika Korps was preparing an offensive, probably aimed at the southern end of the Alamein line where the defenses were weakest. Montgomery studied the terrain. The Alam Halfa Ridge dominated the southern sector, a long, low rise that commanded the surrounding desert. If Rommel broke through in the south, he would have to take that ridge to secure his advance. Montgomery decided to make it a killing ground. He positioned the 44th Infantry Division on the ridge, dug in with extensive minefields and anti-tank guns. Behind them, he placed the 22nd Armored Brigade with over 90 tanks, hull down in prepared positions. Artillery was registered on every approach. The plan was to let Rommel attack, channel him into the killing zone, and destroy his panzers through firepower rather than maneuver. It was the opposite of how British commanders had fought before: defensive, methodical, patient. His officers were skeptical. This was not how you beat Rommel. You had to be mobile, aggressive, ready to counterattack. Montgomery listened and disagreed. Aggression without superiority was suicide. The Afrika Korps had better tanks. The Panzer III and IV outgunned most British models, and the 88mm guns were devastating. British advantage lay in numbers and firepower, not individual tank quality. So they would fight from positions where numbers and firepower mattered most. August 30th, 1942. Shortly after midnight, German artillery opened fire on the southern sector. Rommel was attacking, exactly as Montgomery had predicted. The Afrika Korps came forward with around 200 German tanks and 240 Italian tanks, supported by motorized infantry. Their objective was to break through the southern defenses, swing north behind the Alamein line, and cut off the entire Eighth Army. Montgomery, in his headquarters, received reports calmly. The attack was developing as expected. German and Italian forces were pushing through the minefields, taking casualties but making progress. By dawn, lead elements of the 21st Panzer Division were approaching Alam Halfa Ridge. Montgomery gave no orders for a counterattack. Let them come. The panzers hit the ridge at mid-morning. British anti-tank guns opened fire at close range. Artillery, pre-registered on every approach, began falling in concentrated barrages. Tanks of the 22nd Armored Brigade dug into hull-down positions, engaged at ranges where their guns were effective. The German advance stalled. Rommel pushed harder, committing more tanks, but the British positions held. Everywhere the panzers turned, they met minefields, anti-tank guns, artillery fire. By afternoon, the attack was faltering. Rommel's tanks were taking heavy losses, and critically, they were burning fuel at an unsustainable rate. The deep penetration he needed, the rapid exploitation that had won previous battles, wasn't happening. The British were fighting differently, refusing to be drawn out, content to sit in their positions and destroy anything that came within range. Montgomery watched the battle develop and saw his assessment confirmed. The Afrika Korps was formidable when mobile, when it could maneuver and concentrate force at weak points. But pinned against prepared defenses, forced to attack uphill into concentrated firepower, it was just another armored force grinding itself down in a battle of attrition. And attrition was a battle Rommel couldn't win. September 1st. The German attack continued, but with diminishing strength. Fuel shortages were crippling mobility. Tank losses mounted. British air superiority, the Royal Air Force flew over 1,000 sorties during the battle, meant German supply columns were under constant attack. Rommel recognized failure. On September 2nd, he began withdrawing. By September 5th, the battle was over. British casualties totaled around 1,750 men killed, wounded, or missing. Rommel lost approximately 2,900 men, 50 tanks destroyed, and 400 vehicles destroyed or damaged. More importantly, he had lost the initiative. The Afrika Korps had attacked with everything it had and been stopped cold. The myth of invincibility was broken. Montgomery held a press conference after the battle. Reporters asked about Rommel's reputation, about the vaunted Afrika Korps. Montgomery's response was characteristically blunt. Rommel is a very good general, but he is not a magician. He has certain methods, and if you study those methods and prepare properly, you can defeat him. That assessment, clinical, analytical, confident, captured Montgomery's entire approach. He had spent his first weeks in command studying the enemy, identifying patterns, recognizing weaknesses. The Afrika Korps excelled at mobile warfare, at rapid maneuver, at exploiting British mistakes. So Montgomery eliminated the mistakes. He refused to maneuver. He refused to react. He built a battle plan around his strengths, numbers, firepower, logistics, and forced Rommel to fight that battle. His officers began to understand. This was not about matching German tactical skill tank for tank. It was about creating conditions where tactical skill mattered less than material superiority. Montgomery had looked at the Afrika Korps and seen not an unstoppable force, but a formation operating at the limits of its logistics, dependent on fuel it didn't have, fighting an enemy that outnumbered it in every category. Defeat Rommel, he had concluded, by refusing to fight his kind of battle. Through September and into October, Montgomery prepared his next move. He built up supplies, trained his troops, refined his plans. The Eighth Army would attack at El Alamein, but only when ready, only when the material advantage was overwhelming. Churchill pressed for action. The Prime Minister wanted a victory, wanted it soon. Montgomery refused to be rushed. He would attack when he was ready. Not before. October 23rd, 1942. At 9:40 in the evening, over 1,000 British guns opened fire simultaneously along a 6-mile front. The barrage lasted 15 minutes, the largest artillery concentration in the Desert War. Then, infantry divisions moved forward into the German minefields, clearing paths for the armor to follow. Montgomery had around 195,000 men and 1,029 tanks. Rommel, who was in Germany on sick leave when the battle started, had roughly 116,000 men and 547 tanks. The battle lasted 12 days. It was brutal, grinding, exactly the kind of attritional fight Montgomery wanted. German tactical skill still showed. Counterattacks were fierce, defensive positions well chosen, but the material balance was crushing. For every tank Rommel lost, he had no replacement. British losses were replaced within days. Fuel shortages meant German mobility was gone. Air superiority meant supply columns were decimated. Rommel returned to North Africa on October 25th and immediately recognized the situation was hopeless. He fought with his usual skill, shifting forces to threatened sectors, launching counterattacks, trying to stabilize the line. But Montgomery kept pressing, kept attacking, kept forcing Rommel to burn fuel and ammunition he couldn't replace. By November 3rd, the Afrika Korps was shattered. On November 4th, Rommel began a full retreat. Hitler ordered him to stand fast. Rommel ignored the order and withdrew anyway. The pursuit lasted over 1,500 miles across Libya into Tunisia. The Afrika Korps, once the terror of the desert, was now a broken force scrambling westward, harassed by air attacks, short of everything. Montgomery followed methodically, refusing to overextend, maintaining his supply lines. It was not the dramatic slashing pursuit Rommel might have attempted. It was careful, professional, inexorable. What Montgomery had said when he first saw the Afrika Korps, or rather, when he first assessed them as a commander, was contained in his actions and his words to his officers. He saw a skilled enemy, yes, a dangerous enemy, but also a predictable one, operating under crippling constraints, dependent on methods that could be countered through preparation and material superiority. He saw, in short, an enemy that could be beaten if you refused to fight on their terms. His post-war writings expanded on this assessment. He acknowledged Rommel's tactical brilliance, but noted that tactical brilliance couldn't overcome strategic weakness. The Afrika Korps was always outnumbered, always short of supplies, always vulnerable to interdiction of its supply lines. British commanders before Montgomery had lost because they fought the wrong kind of battle. Mobile, reactive, playing to German strengths. Montgomery won because he fought the right kind of battle. Attritional, methodical, playing to British strengths. There was professional respect in his assessment, but no awe. The Afrika Korps, Montgomery concluded, was a formation that had achieved remarkable results through skill and aggression, but it was not invincible. It was, ultimately, a mid-sized mechanized force at the end of a fragile supply line, and once you recognized that reality and planned accordingly, it could be defeated. The relationship between Montgomery and Rommel became one of the war's most studied rivalries. They never met during the fighting. Their encounter was purely through the medium of battle. After the war, Montgomery visited Rommel's widow and spoke respectfully of his former opponent. He acknowledged Rommel as a worthy adversary, a skilled tactician, a brave soldier, but he never wavered from his core assessment. Rommel was good, but he was not unbeatable. That assessment, formed in those first days of August 1942, when Montgomery arrived in Egypt and began studying the enemy he would face, proved accurate. At El Alamein, the Afrika Korps attacked and was stopped. At El Alamein, it was defeated decisively. The pursuit across North Africa ended with Axis surrender in Tunisia in May 1943. The Afrika Korps, the formation that had dominated the desert for 2 years, ceased to exist. Montgomery's contribution was not tactical genius. His battles were methodical rather than brilliant. It was clear-eyed assessment. He looked at the Afrika Korps and saw past the reputation, past the propaganda, past the string of victories. He saw the reality, a skilled but outnumbered force with fragile logistics, fighting an enemy that could replace losses while they could not. He saw how to win, and then he executed that plan with professional competence.